Okay, so welcome back to another episode of the TARDIS Coffee Break podcast. You may have noticed last week I don't think I actually had any coffee, despite the name, but I do have coffee this week. I didn't really have much time to record it last week, so I didn't have time to make a coffee beforehand or anything, and this might actually be the first week where I've actually had coffee, because the first episode I had a lemsip because I had a cold, so this is like the first actual coffee of TARDIS Coffee Break podcast. I didn't really have plans to do another episode so soon, but I watched the Doctor Who podcast, the most recent one that they did at San Diego Comic-Con, and I wasn't really expecting them to talk about much of interest in the actual podcast itself, because there's not normally a lot of things that happen in the official Doctor Who podcast that is really worth talking about. But obviously at SDCC this year, the podcast was with Russell T Davies, Millie Gibson and Ncuti Gatwa, but I still wasn't expecting too much to be revealed, even with Russell being there. So I've already watched it all through beforehand, and because I didn't expect them to talk about too much, I wasn't really making any notes throughout because I wasn't planning on doing an episode on this, so I can't remember exactly what was spoken about. So basically in this podcast episode I'm going to be rewatching it and then kind of interjecting at certain points. I'm not entirely sure how long this is going to end up being, because I'm not going to be showing the whole podcast in its entirety. I'm just going to be showing the relevant clips to the bits that I want to react to and talk about. But that's basically the plan for this episode this week. But before I get into that, I want to talk about another quick bit of news that we've had related to Doctor Who recently, which is related to Doctor Who Series 2 on BBC iPlayer. So some of you may know, one of the episodes has actually been removed from BBC iPlayer recently, because basically there's been some, I can't remember if it was charges or a sentencing against the BBC News presenter Hugh Edwards, which, you know, I'm not going to go into too much depth here, but it's quite bad. He shows up in the Series 2 episode, Fear Her. He's basically commentating over the 2012 Olympics that are shown in that episode, the Doctor carrying the torch and all that stuff, I believe, from what I remember. And so because he shows up briefly in that episode, they've decided to remove the whole episode from BBC iPlayer, which is definitely an interesting choice. I'm personally not sure how I feel about this decision. I don't think it was really necessary to remove a whole episode just because of that. Maybe they'll eventually re-upload it with him edited out somehow or something like that, but it's a very odd choice in my opinion. Obviously it's not great what he's done, but you know, there's been questionable things from a lot of other like cast members of even New Who, you know, like John Barrowman and Noel Clarke and stuff, and those episodes haven't been removed. So I do think it's a very interesting decision. There's obviously also some very questionable stuff in Classic Who, which is all on BBC iPlayer, besides obviously the missing episodes, which I don't know if they come with a warning on iPlayer. As far as I remember, they don't, but you know, they're still available on here, and people obviously know that it was a thing of the time. And so I do think removing it is a bit of an odd choice, because obviously at the time when he was in the episode, people didn't know what he was like, what he was getting up to, that he later has been sentenced or charged for, whatever it was. And he barely appears in the episode, so I do think it is a bit of an odd decision. But yeah, as you can see here, it goes from episode 10, Love and Monsters, to episode 12, Army of Ghosts, with episode 11, Fear Her, just completely missing, which, you know, like I said, I don't necessarily agree with the choice. I do think it's a bit of an odd decision, but Fear Her is honestly one of the weakest episodes, not just of Series 2, but of the show just in general. It's incredibly boring, and it could have happened to a worse episode, is basically what I'm trying to say. I don't think we're really missing much here. I think if we had an episode like Blink or something like that removed, you know, this would be a bigger news story than it is, but most people, it's just kind of passed them by because it's not really an episode that people are going to miss all that much. I really don't enjoy Fear Her, so it doesn't really bother me all that much. But if there's any Fear Her defenders, Fear Her lovers in the comments, please let me know. And let me know what you think about this decision in the comments down below. Okay, with that being said, we're now going to get into the main event of this, where I'm going to be reacting to the official Doctor Who podcast and going over some of the little tidbits that mostly Russell, but I think maybe Ncuti as well, has kind of talked about in this episode of the podcast that they did live at San Diego Comic-Con 2024.
I mean, I love that story, but actually the whole episode is a conversation between the Doctor and Ruby. Yeah. It's 45 minutes of you. You get split up at the end when you have to run and stop Jocelyn and you're stuck in the airlock, but that's like 2 minutes. It's like the entire entire thing is, hello, this is the TARDIS, let's meet some dinosaurs, let's go to the future, oh, there's some babies, we have to help the babies, how long are we staying? You know, but she says, are we staying for 10 years? What's going on? How does it work? Then you have to do the right thing, you can't kill the monster, you have to save the monster. So, and then at the end of which is, do you want to come with me? So actually the whole thing is actually two people getting to know each other, and it's a great privilege to be able to write something like that for prime time. And you two were just brilliant in it.
Yeah, so I think that's like a good explanation of what Space Babies is. Obviously, there's a lot of people that aren't a big fan of Space Babies, myself included. I think it was just fine. It was a fun episode, but at the end of the day, it was there to kind of set up the Doctor and Ruby's relationship and just kind of set up the show for the new viewers and the dynamic and, you know, what the TARDIS can do and all that stuff. So ultimately that is what it's about, which, you know, I think it succeeds in that respect, but it's a bit of a silly episode and it definitely could put some people off of it if it's their first one.
Maybe I had a scene where you had to do this beautiful monologue.
This beautiful monologue that got cut. Where basically I had to talk to these babies, of course, about, you know, Ruby's upbringing and how she was abandoned. It was really beautiful, but obviously their stage direction was to be completely entranced by me, and they weren't. For some unknown reason, and I had to get a nursery rhyme on my phone just to get them to look at me, and it was like, what am I doing right now? This is bizarre. But yeah, no, so yeah, that's probably why I got cut.
Your entire monologue could have been Baby Shark.
So yeah, this kind of reveals there was a cut monologue from Ruby in Space Babies when she's talking to the Space Babies, basically talking about how she was abandoned and she doesn't know who her mother is and all that stuff, which I think would have been interesting, but, you know, it doesn't reveal anything that we don't already know to the audience. You know, we get the moment with the flashback earlier on in the episode, and I guess it's kind of assumed that people have already seen Church on Ruby Road before this episode and stuff like that. But yeah, this is like a funny story that she has to get the nursery rhyme up to kind of get the baby's actors to like pay attention to her and stuff, but either that didn't work very well and so it was kind of unusable, or they just needed to cut it for time, basically.
And Shooty, that's one of the first times that we see your character kind of grappling with this thing that the Doctor always has to deal with, this being the last, this feeling of loneliness, and being in a position where you have to make this decision about saving a life and what that means.
Yeah.
Like, how, as an actor, how do you approach that?
One of the kind of beautiful elements of the Doctor that I picked up from previous Doctors is that they have this sense of everything is important in the universe and everything kind of has its place. And it's just full of compassion. I don't know, it was one of that bit in the script was like, this is informative as to who 15 is for me. So it's just like, he's a nice guy. I'm going to save this monster.
I mean, this does really show that Shooty kind of really gets the character. I was kind of expecting him to bring up the kind of connections to his own personal life in this question, instead of just talking about like the script and, you know, previous Doctors and stuff like that, because we do know that obviously this whole Last of His Kind and stuff like that, like Shooty's got like a bit of a connection there with, you know, his own experience escaping a genocide in Rwanda and stuff like that, or fleeing from that genocide. So it would have been nice for him to mention some of that stuff, but, you know, this is obviously his truth, so if that's what he thought the answer to the question should be, then, you know, that's fair enough. And it's nice to see that he really gets the character from both reading the script and from seeing previous Doctors and stuff like that.
The whole episode is a conversation between the Doctor and Ruby. It was also, just to bear in mind, I knew we had episodes coming up in which Shooty was still filming Sex Education, and so we'd have slightly less Doctor in a couple of episodes, so it kind of gets missed, I think, the fact that these first two episodes and a lot of episode 3 are just you two. Just you two. You don't cut away to any subplots. No one else has got anything else going on, apart from little fleeting moments. It's just the two of you talking your way through the story and talking your way through what Doctor Who is, which I love because you're so brilliant.
Russell brings up a good point here that I hadn't really thought about. The first 3 episodes are very good at setting up the Doctor and Ruby's relationship, because it's, you know, with some of the episodes after that not having the Doctor in it, or not having the Doctor and Ruby in it very much, it is good to have the first 3 kind of mostly about them and kind of setting up their relationship and stuff like that. So I think that is a good point. I mean, it is still a little bit weird because of the like time jumps within the episodes, like the first 3 episodes and stuff like that, but I think it's a good point that you want the first 3 episodes to kind of be about their relationship basically before you get into, 73 yards where the Doctor's not really in it, or Dot and Bubble where the Doctor and Ruby aren't in it a whole bunch. So I think that's a good point.
Let's talk about Boom. We're going to spend an entire episode on a landmine because Stephen Moffat wrote this episode. Stephen Moffat likes to break your heart. Now, Shooty and Millie, this seemed like a very intense episode to film. You stood on a landmine, and you were all in one location.
Oh, that's by the end of the first week. Oh, that set was giving us such PTSD.
You were on one leg for like 2 weeks.
One leg, 2 weeks. I had one very strong glute. After that episode, amazing to film though, like because of the intensity. It felt like we say often that it felt like rehearsing a play because we shot it in chronological order. It was all in one place. It felt like we were in the round because it was like crater. Yeah,
we've heard this before. I think they talked about it in Unleashed, or it might have been in some of the behind the scenes YouTube videos where they basically filmed all of Boom in mostly or all in chronological order because, it all takes place in one set. So they've kind of got the ability to be able to do that without having to have these different, set pieces that they have to film all at the same time because it's all one kind of set piece, I guess, in a way. And that really does help the episode because the actors, are experiencing it as the characters would be experiencing it pretty much, which I think is very cool. And like, it definitely shows in the episode because of how well executed it is. But yeah, I can imagine it's also very difficult for Shooty having to basically have it be on one leg for most of the shoot as well. It's probably quite intensive.
Russell, this episode used technology that Doctor Who's never used before. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, that was the lot of the background of the planet was one of those huge LED screens, which you're science fiction fans, Star Wars is using the volume a lot and stuff like that. We can't quite afford the volume, but it's a step towards it. It's the most vast LED screen which moves with the camera. It's very beautiful and sophisticated. And a lot of people, marvelous man called Billy, who was a huge Doctor Who fan who works for Pixamondo, spent months designing those clouds in the background.
Incredible.
Aren't they beautiful? The colour of those skies.
Yeah.
Even the background of the TARDIS when they step out the TARDIS is part of the flat screen. It's hard to understand in a way, isn't it? It's if you see the Doctor Who Unleashed behind the scenes of that, it shows you how it's done. And it's what Doctor Who should always do. Way back in time in history, in 1981 or something, there was a Tom Baker story called Meglos, where Tom Baker played a giant cactus. And Meglos, we love Meglos. And at the time, that was in very simple video technology. That used a thing called scene sync, where some people step out of a spaceship and walk over to these giant screens on an alien planet, and so the camera moves with them. That was the very first time that had ever been done. And if you see that now, it looks very simple. But that's what Doctor Who was always doing. Doctor Who was one of the first to use green screen, full stop. In 1970, John Pertwee was fighting dinosaurs, and they were put in with green screen. So, so everything you see being done now, amazing. Those early pioneers, it's always been a pioneering show, so no matter what's happening technology, we have to kind of run to keep up, and hopefully we'll keep running.
So this is a good thing to point out. I think some people are still a little bit confused by this, especially if they haven't watched the Unleashed episode. They seem to think that they used the volume in Boom to film Boom, which they sort of did, but they didn't. Like Russell said here, they don't have the money or the access to actually use the proper volume, but they use a very similar technology where it's just one, I believe it was just one big LED screen instead of, the actual volume that goes all the way around and stuff like that. But it's a very similar technology, but it's not exactly the same. But it does work really well in the episode. There are some points, in my opinion, where it does show that it's a screen and not, you kind of can tell that they're not actually there. But that's more like later on when it's kind of the kind of dawn kind of points where the sun's kind of coming up at the end and stuff like that. You can kind of tell there that it's a screen. But for the most part in that episode, I think using the LED screen sort of volume type technology works really well, and it must have been really a lot easier to perform to on set as well. And I know in classic Who they use a lot of, not technically green screen, but I think it's called CSO from what I remember, but I'm not entirely sure what the screen sync thing is that he's on about in Megalos. I haven't bothered to try and go and find the moment that he's talking about, but if anyone knows any more about that screen sync technology, let me know about it in the comments down below.
And why is it so important to you that Doctor Who pushes boundaries and stays up to speed with how the show is filmed?
I get jealous when I see what's happening on the other shows, because I think Doctor Who deserves the best. It's as simple as that. But I do, and when you see, and obviously nothing is better than a good idea. Nothing's more important than that. The good story is the point. But when you're doing that, actually, it's a tough world now. You're on streaming. There's all these shows. You watch The Acolyte and stuff like that, and The Boys, and these brilliant shows. I love these shows, and I never want Doctor Who to be a kind of poor cousin to that. So I'll always keep pushing to try and do that, while absolutely saying that, not one of those shows could produce an episode like Blink.
And this seems very in character for Russell as well, obviously saying he wants to be in kind of the same leagues as the Star Wars shows and The Boys and stuff like that. It kind of speaks to what he was saying before he was announced to be coming back, where he kind of wants it to be kind of an MCU style universe, which obviously he's kind of started doing with the whole Whoniverse stuff. So this is very in character for Russell, basically.
Speaking of 73 yards, we get an episode where the Doctor disappears, and we see a version of Ruby's entire life and hairstyle trajectories plays out. Millie, you give such a phenomenal performance. For this to be your first episode, how was it to tackle something of that nature?
It was crazy, to be honest. I mean, I just finished Coronation Street, which is a very big ensemble cast. So to come from that onto this, and it just to be like, okay, you're getting your own episode. It was like, oh, we're shooting? I know, you were
Riding a bike
riding
with
a
Otis.
bike. And yeah, I remember reading 73 Yards, and I talk about this all the time. I was just absolutely absorbed and transformed into the world that was Russell's scripts. But yeah, it was incredible. I reread it straight again because it was just the most capturing thing I've ever, and I was like, how am I going to be 40? So that was the first thought. But I watched that episode back and was just, I was really chuffed. I was really happy with it.
Spellbinding.
Thank you, baby.
Yeah, and obviously, once again, it is worth mentioning, as probably everybody knows now, 73 Yards was Millie's first episode that she filmed for the show, and to say that she's just come off, like she says, a big ensemble cast at Corrie and is now just doing a whole episode by herself to start off the show, and she still does a fantastic performance. It's something that should be very much applauded. She did a great job.
Now, Russell, this was such a departure of the usual Doctor Who episode. Was this a story you've wanted to tell for some time?
Well, I think Doctor Who should always depart from the... It does. It's always been very different every week, and I really wanted to do a series in which that was especially true, wildly different every week. And it's funny, this is an idea I'd had for a long while. I don't think I've ever told you this, but I could never make it work because I thought it was with the two of you. I spent years in my head trying to get a story where the Doctor and the companion and a woman stood at 73 yards, so they were like triangulating each other, but it was really hard to... I would have got there in the end, but it was like, you'd say, well, go and look, so the woman would move. It probably was impossible with two people, so it had ticked away even before I knew I was coming back to Doctor Who, in a way, as an idea about what if that happens. And then, not that we were glad to be rid of you, but then you were busy. Then you were doing sex education. So the moment they said, oh my God, the dates aren't working, so shoot, you have to do sex ed. You have to do one episode with Ruby on her own. I went, oh my God, it works. It's like, oh, 73 yards. You just need one person. I'd never thought of that.
I think this is one of the new revelations we've had from this podcast episode. I don't think we've ever heard Russell say this before, that he's actually had the idea for 73 Yards for quite a while now and was originally planning to have it with the Doctor and companion both there, and they were like triangulating this being, and they're trying to figure out what's going on, the two of them, constantly 73 yards away from both of them, which is definitely a very interesting idea. But you can tell, you know, obviously he says as soon as he figured out that Ncuti wasn't going to be available, it suddenly all just made sense, and it would just be, you know, 73 yards away from the companion, in this case from Ruby, which I think is a very interesting little tidbit about 73 yards that I'm pretty sure we've not heard him mention before, so that's very interesting.
You deserve every bit of flowers. It was a tremendous episode, and you just conveyed
Just
it.
turned 18 as well.
Yeah. That's amazing. Yeah. That is amazing.
Playing 40.
Yeah, and it is worth mentioning how young Millie was as well when she filmed this as her first episode. Like, the amount of pressure she must have had on her to film this one episode where it's all just basically by herself, and it's the first thing she's filming for the show. Once again, it's something that should be applauded, and especially at such a young age. And it's crazy to think we have a companion actor that's younger than me now, which doesn't, you know, for me, that's not really ever been a thing.
Playing 40.
We didn't make you play the 80-year-old.
Yeah. That was going to happen, though. And
We
then they
talked
were
about
like,
it.
Yeah.
We were like-
And they were like, I think this is too far.
The hair did a lot of the work. It was doing a lot of heavy lifting.
No, I was really feeling myself. I thought it was great. Yeah.
Oh, that long, like Ruby at 35 and 40? I was like, this is the length. I like this.
Yeah.
And this is something I can't remember if it's been mentioned before as well in Unleashed. I can't remember if it sounds like it's something we've maybe heard before, but they were originally planning to have old age makeup on Millie for when she was, you know, not only for when she was 40, which they barely did makeup for, but they did do a little bit, but they were also doing it for when she was, you know, the old, very old version of Ruby, where she was in her like 70s, 80s, whatever it was. Maybe it could have worked, you know. The makeup is, the techniques for it have evolved very much recently, and with the budget, the Disney budget, I'm sure they could have pulled something off that looked kind of realistic. I'm just not sure maybe how much Millie could have got like the mannerisms of an old person in there with how young she is. You maybe would have realized that it's just an 18-year-old playing, you know, an 80-year-old. It would be very difficult to achieve. So I think they made the right decision in casting an older person in there, but it does also make you kind of, you can't connect as much when you can't tell that it looks like Millie, basically. So, you know, I think they went for the right decision, but I can see why they were debating which way to go with that.
Now, Russell, there are a lot of themes in this episode that are very present in the world today, particularly race and social media. Now, how important is it that Doctor Who reflects back these themes in its storytelling, especially given that we are seeing a new experience and lived experience of the Doctor that he has never known before?
Absolutely. I thought that had to be looked in the eye in the script. Everyone was kind of expecting a story about racism to happen in the past. Like, what will happen in 1600? What will happen in 1800? And I thought, well, like, we're rid of that problem now. So I very much wanted to do that. And it's how it's just how I write. It's how Doctor Who should always be. You look at Space Babies, and they're worrying about actually, which is some pro-choice problems in there. And you look at what Stephen Moffat says about warfare, and in episode 3. So no, I think the program at its best is, and what we're talking about with adoption, foster care, with Ruby. It's like if you're writing well, I think those things just rise up. But you know, it's so I did think it was important in that one instance to stare at this, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think this is something as well that Russell has mentioned before. You know, people would have been expecting when we got the first mainline Black Doctor that if they were going to do an episode that tackles racism against the Doctor, and, you know, as something that kind of hinders the like power that he normally commands in like every situation he's in, they would have expected that to happen in an episode where they go to the past. And I think it's a very interesting decision, but in a positive way, that Russell decided to do that first episode where they tackle that in the future, because obviously, like he says, racism is still a thing now, and, you know, there's nothing saying that it's more than likely going to be an issue that far into the future as well, you know, especially in these kind of closed off bubbles, I guess you could say, these closed off echo chambers and communities that Fine Time is kind of representing in the future. So I do think that was a very interesting decision in a good way. I think I mentioned this in my Space Babies review. I like the political commentary in Space Babies with the abortion analogies, the pro-choice, pro-life debate and stuff like that, and the kind of refugees debate, but it's not really fleshed out a whole lot in Space Babies. It's just kind of two fleeting mentions, but I like that. And obviously he mentions the capitalism and the warfare themes of Boom by Stephen Moffat, which I think are handled a lot better than the ones in Space Babies.
I appreciate that it wasn't heavy-handed, it was honest. And we kind of, upon the rewatch of the episode, when you go back and you catch the microaggressions are very, very strong. And like Lindy, like Callie delivered that in a way where when I went back and watched it, I was like, what did I do to you? It's like, I didn't do nothing to you. But you just kind of see the way, just like deleting the doctor instantly, knocking him out of that scenario, and just treating his existence as if it's a nuisance when he's just trying to help.
And yeah, that's one of the big benefits, I think, of Dot and Bubble. I think when you watch it, and this was the experience for me at least for the first time, I did pick up on some of the microaggressions there, and I did kind of know from like a leak that there was going to be potentially a racism reveal at the end. So that's maybe why I picked up on those microaggressions throughout. But for a lot of people, they didn't pick up on them, and it's also one of those things where when you watch Dot and Bubble the first time, you maybe, and this is the same for me, think it's a bit of like a kind of mid episode. There's not really a whole lot going on, and then obviously that final scene really elevates the whole episode, and it makes it so that when you rewatch it, it's even better on a rewatch than the first watch, which is something that's probably quite difficult to do, but it's really incredible that they managed to do that. Because now whenever I rewatch Dot and Bubble, sure, there's still some moments for me where it does drag a little bit, but it's definitely improved by picking up on these things that you only really pick up on after the reveal in the last 5 minutes of the episode.
We did all our stuff in one day on an auto. What is it? What do you call it?
Auto cue.
Auto cue. Yeah. Pretending to talk to find time, and it was lovely. We had a few days off.
Yeah, and this is the thing that people were speculating. I don't think they specifically said how long Shooty and Millie's filming of Dot and Bubble was, but people have speculated that they may have just been in for literally just one day, and it makes sense with how little they're in the episode and how they're only in that one location basically, besides obviously the end scene. Millie basically confirms here that it was just one day, unless she's misremembering it and it was a couple of days, which to me makes sense because you can tell they probably only needed one day for that, and obviously they still had Shooty for a very limited amount of time at that point.
But she led that episode so beautifully, and she's so good at being Lindsay, and yeah, I was entranced by that episode with her lead in it.
The background
it's a
colors were
difficult
fantastic.
job
It was
because
difficult.
you can't give away the beast before like that final scene, and so like she has so much complex stuff to portray. She killed it.
And yeah, Shooty's absolutely right here. It's a very difficult task that they give to Callie Cook, because she knows obviously the reveal at the end that Callie Cook does, the actor. She knows what this character really is like, but you can't give that away early on in the episode. So you've got to make her, still a bit annoying and brash and stuff like that, but you still got to make her likable enough to be the protagonist and to think that she can change at the end of the episode, whilst also knowing that the character isn't going to change at the end of the episode and is actually going to be revealed to be even worse than they initially seem. They're not just annoying and rich and posh and whatever, they're racist. So it's definitely a difficult task that they gave to Callie Cook, and I think she pulled it off amazingly. She's one of the best, I would say, supporting actors in the season, but she's not really, she's the lead of that episode and she does a great job of it.
Now, Russell, for this episode, we have a new writing duo, Kate Herron, a fellow showrunner of a time-traveling show, Loki, and Brioni Redmond. Now, how did this come about? Can you tell us if there's any writers you'd love to work with on Doctor Who in the future?
Oh, so many. It came about. It's such a long story. I'll try and condense it down. I accidentally criticized Loki for its representation of bisexuality. What I mean is I didn't make a press release. I was talking to a bunch of students on a Zoom in Swansea University. You'd think that's a private conversation. It gets put online. You think I'd learn that by now, wouldn't you? That was stupid of me not to. So then it looks like I was making a statement saying I didn't think their portrayal of bisexuality was very good, and I stand by that. I don't think it was, and of course that then hits the headlines, and so I've never met Kate in my life, and then she gets asked about it in every single interview. It's not her fault, and it reached the stage where like the reporter from Variety at a premiere was saying, "So, Kate, we're super keen to know your answer to why Russell T Davies is criticising you," and I was so embarrassed. I don't know what accent that was. That was, and I was so embarrassed. I wrote to her. I found her agent, and I wrote to her and said, "I'm so sorry if I'm causing you any. Work is busy, isn't it? Who needs me going yap yap yap?" And so I'm sorry if I caused you any hassle. She wrote back, and she was delightful, and then turned out to be a Doctor Who fan. And then I said, "So will you come and write one?" She said, "Yes, my writing partner's Bryony," and we ended up with the most. So out of a strange conflict, the most gorgeous creation came.
she DM'd me and was so excited that you had reached out. And
Yes, because she worked on Sex Ed. In fact, no one knew you were the Doctor at the time, so I secretly told her, and she was so delighted.
So yeah, this is a very interesting thing that we've not heard before, but I know people are obviously speculating. Like, obviously people knew that Russell had criticised Loki, which Kate Herron was showrunning at the time, and people were wondering kind of how that relationship was when she, then later writes for the show. And it seems like that's kind of what sparked the basically her writing an episode for the show with Bryony Redman, which is very interesting. That the reason that happened is because Russell reached out to her, basically like apologising for her getting all this flack for the bisexual representation in Loki. And it's interesting that that's how that came about, because we were wondering where that connection was, whether it was a Disney connection or whether it was something to do with that Loki criticism that RTD had. So it's interesting to find out that it basically all came about because he reached out to her to apologise for all the flack she's getting, and she was then like, oh no, I'm a fan of the show and I want to write an episode. So I think that's very interesting. And like I said in the Rogue review, it was a very good episode. I liked it, but it was a very standard episode of Doctor Who. Kate Herron and Bryony Redman, or even just one or the other, I don't know if they're always going to write stuff together. If they come back to write another episode of Doctor Who, I'd be very happy, because I think they do a very good job.
Now, Russell, when you got the job to return as showrunner, what was the first thing you knew you had to write?
Oh, Mrs. Flood, obviously. Come on, who is she? No, the first thing I wanted to do actually was in Britain to create the Whoniverse, to get all the classic old Doctor Who and the new Doctor Who onto the iPlayer together. Which had never existed, and it's easy for me to say it took a lot of lawyers a lot of time, 2 years to do that, and I'm so pleased that exists.
So this makes sense. Like I was saying earlier, even before Russell was officially announced to be returning, and maybe even before he'd agreed to return, he'd already been saying he wants to make Doctor Who kind of like the MCU, where it's this big universe with loads of interconnecting things and spin-offs and stuff like that. And so making the Whoniverse one of his first things that he wanted to do, or the first thing that he wanted to do, definitely makes sense when you think back to those remarks that he made in the past about basically MCU-ifying Doctor Who, pretty much. So that definitely makes sense. And obviously now we've got all of Classic Who and the spin-offs and stuff like that on BBC iPlayer, which is just fantastic.
Did the restoring effects of Sutek's defeat help fix the universe destroyed in the Flux, and could it bring back Gallifrey?
Oh, wow. Well, I think if you're going to bring back Gallifrey, you do a great big story about it, not like mentioned in brackets, in parentheses at the end of a previous story. Oh, by the way, we also did that. But I remember asking Chris Chimmel how much of the universe was destroyed, because it says 90%, doesn't it, was destroyed by the Flux. And then I just kind of thought to myself, well, 90% of infinity is infinity, so that's fine. I think we're managing okay.
I think this is a good point that he's making. He's obviously done this in the past with like the End of Time, where Gallifrey is brought back and it's basically the whole crux of the story. But I don't know if we need that again. Gallifrey keeps being destroyed and brought back and stuff like this. I think it would be weird to have another story focused on it when we've had so many stories focused on Gallifrey either being destroyed or being brought back. I think having the stuff with Sutek bringing life back to the universe is kind of an easy way to just explain that Gallifrey's back, in my opinion. But clearly he wants to make a bigger deal of it than that, and not just kind of have it just be there and be back for no reason, basically, which is fair enough. But I don't think we need another story that's about Gallifrey coming back again when we've had the End of Time and Day of the Doctor and stuff like that. It's not really something that we need when Gallifrey's been destroyed and brought back this many times in stories before. So I'm not sure if I agree with him on that, but fair enough. That's how he thinks about it. Yeah, and it seems to suggest here as well that it doesn't really explain or fix the kind of flux problem with the universe, kind of 90% of the universe not existing or whatever it is. Russell's just kind of saying 90% of infinity is still infinity, so it doesn't really matter. There's still an infinite universe out there, even if 90% of it has apparently been destroyed by the Flux. So I think it seems like he's not really going to cover that either, really. I think he's going about this stuff the right way with both the Flux and the Timeless Children or Timeless Child arc, where he's not coming at it from like a lore perspective and kind of explaining stuff and fixing it and stuff like that. He's going for the emotional impact of these storylines, with it kind of feeding into the Doctor and Ruby's connection as being adopted, and having the emotional effect on the Doctor of what the Flux did, basically, from, we got that in like Wild Blue Yonder and stuff like that. So I think that's the best way to approach it, and I feel like he doesn't want to do much more with it than that. He doesn't want to go back and fix it or do much more lore implications with it, which I think is the right way to go about it.
Who had the red nails?
Well, I do know, but I'm not going to tell you. Imagine if I just told you now. I'll just tell you. Right, yes. Hopefully you'll find out one day. There's no one you've seen. I think that's the point.
This is interesting because obviously the red nails, picking up the master's tooth, or the gold tooth of the toy maker that the master is inside at the end of the giggle is, I didn't expect Russell to have an idea of who that was in his head. I thought it was just a nice callback to the series 3 finale, having a little nod to that moment whilst also leaving it open-ended for the master to return in the future. But I didn't think he'd actually know kind of who it was or whatever when he was making that moment. He maybe didn't know when he wrote that moment and when they filmed that moment, and maybe he's now kind of decided who it is. But I didn't think he'd have actually decided who that was now and have plans for that to show up anytime soon. But maybe that means he has plans for that to show up in maybe like season 3 or something like that, maybe even season 2, but I doubt it. Although he does say hopefully you'll find out one day, which to me suggests he maybe knows who it is or has decided who it is, but he's not really written an episode or an arc that kind of explains that yet. He does mention it's no one we've seen yet as well, so it's not going to be like Mrs. Flood or something like that. It's going to be a new character, but apparently he knows who it is, so we'll find out.
With the success of the Goblin song, are there plans for more musicals coming up?
There's a few more songs.
Oh my gosh.
You're not in it. There's a few more songs from... Yes. There are a few more songs.
This is a thing we've heard mentioned. I think they mentioned this in the other SDCC panel that they did, the main Hall H panel, that there's going to be some more kind of musical moments in season 2. Not a musical episode or anything like that, but there's going to be some more musical moments, which, I'm excited to see. I do feel like because we were expecting a full-on musical episode for the Devil's Chord and we didn't get that, it would be nice to have a musical episode. But I think now that they didn't take that opportunity with the Devil's Chord, it's maybe a little bit of a missed opportunity now, and that time's kind of passed. But he has mentioned we are going to get some more musical moments in season 2. I don't know if he literally means with the characters singing original songs. He probably does, or if he just means some more needle drops like with Neil Patrick Harris in the giggle and stuff like that, but we'll see.
Jonathan Groff, is he the next River Song?
I hope. I just wish he hadn't been so successful. When he lost that Tony, he might be dying to come back. We love him. It's an open door.
Yeah, we love
The
him.
nicest man in the world. Seriously.
Talented, nicest, incredible man.
Yeah. So, no promises, but fingers crossed.
So this is another interesting thing. Obviously, I was saying in my Rogue review that I do hope Rogue does return at some point, but I did say I doubt they have any immediate plans for him to return in, season 2. He's probably not going to return. I said maybe season 3, but I'm pretty sure Russell's writing or has finished writing season 3 at this point. So if he's saying, hopefully he'll return, I'm assuming that doesn't mean there's any plans for him to return at the moment. So season 2 and 3, unlikely. But like I've said, I do hope Rogue will return at some point, and I've also said that I hope Kate Herron and Bryony Redmond will return at some point as well to write another episode. So maybe when they return to write another episode, they'll bring back Rogue or something like that. Right, so that's the whole official Doctor Who podcast that was recorded at San Diego Comic-Con a couple weeks ago, but it's only recently been released. There's a few new interesting tidbits there, which is mostly what I've talked about in this episode. There's a few things we've also heard before from, Unleashed and some other interviews and Doctor Who magazine and stuff like that, but I think that's a nice little podcast episode that gives us a few little more tidbits that we've not had, a nice opportunity to get some more tidbits. So let me know what you think about some of those in the comments down below. And that's pretty much it for this episode. I do want to quickly mention some plans that I've got coming up for videos on this channel. I've currently started watching, I'm a couple of parts into the original Sea Devils serial from 1972, because I'm starting to watch every Sea Devils story that we've had in Doctor Who so far in anticipation for them returning in the War Between the Land and the Sea. So I'm going to be discussing the Sea Devils, Warriors of the Deep, and obviously Legend of the Sea Devils, which obviously I've already seen and I've already done a review on, but that's kind of the plan with that. that, I'm going to be doing a whole Sea Devils video in anticipation for the war between the land and the sea. And I might do a similar thing as well for the Silurians later on in the year, you know, before we get them again in Joy to the World, and they might also potentially be in the war between the land and the sea for all we know. So that's kind of the plan there. So if you want to see that video, make sure you subscribe to the channel to not miss that when it comes out. But I'm also going to be doing the unedited reviews for each individual story from the Sea Devils over on my Patreon. So if you want to catch those before I incorporate them and incorporate my thoughts from those reviews into the actual full-length Sea Devil video that I'll be doing later on, make sure you join the Patreon, because they'll be exclusively on there, the actual reviews for each individual story. And also to get early access to the actual video before it comes out as well, that will be on there as soon as it's ready. So that's just a little sneak peek of what's to come on the channel. There's not anything in particular that I have in mind right now for what's going to be happening on the channel. So, you know, just if we get any news or anything like that coming up, I might do a full, more in-depth breakdown of the Joy to the World sneak peek that we got. I did a little quick breakdown on the podcast. I believe it was last week when we first got footage from SDCC, but I'm going to do a more in-depth frame by frame kind of analysis of that footage, I think, as well. So that's something to look out for as well. So if you don't want to miss that, subscribe to the channel and, you know, join the Patreon to get early access to that as well when it's ready. But yeah, thanks for watching.